Tonight we begin with a question that sounds almost romantic when you first hear it. What if you could witness history firsthand? What if you could stand on the front lines of humanity's most defining moments, camera in hand, notebook ready, capturing the raw truth of war for the world to see? Picture yourself as one of those legendary correspondents you've seen in films, the brave soul in a weathered jacket, typewriter clattering in some bombed-out hotel, filing dispatches that changed the course of public opinion. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Sounds important. The kind of career that makes people respect you at parties, the kind of life that feels like it matters. But here's what Hollywood forgot to mention, what the history books gloss over, what the recruitment posters definitely don't tell you: you wouldn't last a single day, not even close. And I don't mean that as some casual insult or challenge to your courage. I mean it literally. The actual physical, psychological reality of being a war correspondent would break you so thoroughly, so completely, that by hour 24 you'd be begging for any other job on earth. Coal mining? Sign you up? Slaughterhouse work? Hand you the apron. Because what you're about to experience isn't just danger, it's a special kind of hell reserved for those who voluntarily walk into humanity's worst moments with nothing but a pen and a prayer. You'll have no weapon, no real protection, no backup plan, and absolutely no guarantee that anyone will care when you disappear. Let's ease into tonight's journey together, shall we? But fair warning, by the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why the average war correspondent's career lasts about as long as a mayfly's lifespan, and why those who survive never quite sleep the same way again. If you'd like more stories like this, please subscribe so you don't miss any new uploads. I'd also love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day you're tuning in. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning in a hotel that shouldn't legally be called a hotel. The building has been shelled twice in the past month, and you can see the sky through a hole in the ceiling of the hallway. Your room, if we're being generous with terminology, is a concrete box that smells like mildew, cordite, and the accumulated despair of every journalist who slept here before you. There's no running water. The electricity works maybe 3 hours a day, and never when you need it. The mattress beneath you feels like it's stuffed with gravel and broken promises, and you're pretty sure something with too many legs has been sharing it with you because you've woken up with bites you can't identify covering your ankles and wrists. You're exhausted, but you haven't really slept. Real sleep is something that stopped happening the moment you arrived in this city, this country, this war zone, whose name you'll carry like scar tissue for the rest of your life. Instead, you've been doing that thing where you hover in a twilight state of semi-consciousness, jerking awake every time you hear a sound that might be artillery, might be a car backfiring, might be someone kicking down your door. Your editor back home, sitting in a climate-controlled office 7,000 miles away, keeps sending you messages about deadlines and word counts and whether you can get more human interest into your pieces. Human interest. As if the humans here are interested in anything other than surviving until sunset. As if you can just walk up to someone who's lost everything and ask them how they feel about it in a way that translates neatly into 800 words with a compelling lead. Your alarm goes off, a phone that's perpetually at 18% battery because the generator downstairs runs on a schedule known only to God and the hotel owner, and those two aren't on speaking terms. You silence it quickly, not because you're worried about waking anyone else. The journalists in the neighboring rooms are already up. You can hear them moving around, coughing, talking in low voices into satellite phones that cost more per minute than most people here earn in a week. No, you silence it because every unnecessary sound feels dangerous, like you're announcing your presence to forces that would prefer you didn't exist. You get dressed in the dark, pulling on the same clothes you've been wearing for 4 days straight. They smell like smoke and sweat and something else you can't quite identify, but that you've come to associate with proximity to death. It's not the smell of death itself, you're not there yet, though you will be later today, but it's something adjacent to it, something that clings to fabric and skin and won't wash out no matter how much you scrub. Your flak jacket is draped over a chair that's missing one leg, propped against the wall at an angle that would be comedic in any other context. The jacket weighs about as much as a small child and offers protection that's more psychological than actual. Sure, it'll stop some shrapnel, maybe a ricochet from a small caliber round if you're lucky and the angle is right. But that artillery shell you keep hearing in the distance, the one that sounds like God clearing his throat, that sniper who's been active in the district you're heading to, the improvised explosive device buried under rubble that looks exactly like all the other rubble, your jacket doesn't care about those. It's theater, basically. Expensive, uncomfortable theater that you wear, because not wearing it would be even more insane. Your helmet sits next to the jacket, scratched and dented from the previous owner. You don't know what happened to them. No one talks about it. There's a whole closet full of equipment at the bureau office downtown. Cameras, laptops, jackets, helmets, all belonging to journalists who didn't come back. Some died, some just broke and went home. The equipment outlasts everyone, waiting patiently for the next idealistic fool to arrive. You strap on the jacket, Velcro making loud ripping sounds in the quiet room. The weight settles on your shoulders like a judgment. You grab your notebook, old school, spiral bound, because electronics fail and batteries die and you need something that works even when everything else doesn't. You've got 3 pens, because you learned on day 2 that pens disappear like socks in a dryer. You've got your press credentials in a plastic sleeve around your neck, as if a laminated piece of paper with your photo on it will somehow protect you, as if combatants who've been awake for 72 hours, hopped up on adrenaline and whatever else they're taking, will pause to read your documentation before deciding whether to shoot you. Your photographer is waiting in the lobby, or what used to be a lobby before the windows blew out and the front desk got converted into a makeshift barricade. His name is Marcus, and he's been doing this for 15 years, which in war correspondent years makes him basically ancient. He's got the look they all get eventually, eyes that don't quite focus on you when you talk, like he's seeing through you to something else, something that happened in some other war zone that he's never quite left behind. He nods when he sees you, doesn't say good morning because what's good about it, and you notice his hands are shaking slightly as he checks his camera equipment. Not from fear, exactly. More like the physical manifestation of accumulated trauma, the body's way of saying it remembers every close call, every explosion, every body he's photographed. You've seen his work. Everyone has. That image of the child in the rubble in Syria, the execution in the square in Mogadishu, the mother clutching her dead son in Sarajevo, photos that won awards, that changed policy, that made people in comfortable countries feel something for approximately 30 seconds before they scrolled on to the next thing. Marcus doesn't talk about the awards. He doesn't display them. You get the feeling he'd throw them all in a river if he could trade them all for one full night of sleep without the nightmares. The fixer arrives next, a local guy named Ahmed who's risking more than you'll ever risk because when you leave, you get to go back to wherever you came from. But this is his home, and the people who don't want stories told about them know exactly where his family lives. Ahmed speaks 4 languages, knows every back road and every checkpoint, and which neighborhoods are controlled by which factions at which times of day. He's saved your life twice already, and you've only been here a week. once by stopping you from walking down a street that looked perfectly safe but was actually in a sniper's kill zone, once by talking you out of trouble at a checkpoint where the fighters were so young they still had acne, which somehow made them more dangerous, not less. Boys with automatic weapons and something to prove are not people you want making decisions about your future. Ahmed hands you a bottle of water that's warm from sitting in his car, and you drink it anyway because hydration isn't optional, even when every sip tastes like plastic and regret. He tells you the plan for the day, speaking in that calm, matter-of-fact tone he uses to describe things that should not be described matter-of-factly. You're going to a neighborhood that was hit by airstrikes overnight. There are reports of civilian casualties. Reports, he says, like there's any doubt, like the evidence won't be splattered across the streets when you get there. Then you're supposed to try to get to a hospital on the other side of the city, see if you can interview some of the wounded, get some quotes that bring this story to life for readers who'll consume it with their morning coffee while complaining that it's too depressing. After that, if you're still alive and functional, there's a refugee camp where people have been living in tents for 6 months, and your editor wants a piece about the humanitarian crisis, wants you to capture the resilience of the human spirit, wants you to find hope in a place where hope goes to die. No pressure, though, just another day at the office. You climb into Ahmed's car, a battered sedan that's held together by duct tape, prayer, and the will of a vehicle that refuses to give up, despite having every reason to do so. The interior smells like cigarettes and fear sweat. There are bullet holes in the rear windshield covered with packing tape. The radio doesn't work. The air conditioning definitely doesn't work. You're going to spend the day cooking in this metal box, driving through streets where death comes from unexpected angles, hoping that the press markings on the car are visible enough to matter, hoping that today isn't the day when someone decides that journalists are legitimate targets, or that they just don't care, or that they mistake you for someone else in the half second it takes to pull a trigger. The city wakes up around you as Ahmed drives, but it's not the kind of waking up you're used to. There's no rush hour, no coffee shops filling with morning crowds, no school buses collecting sleepy children. Instead, there's the sound of generators coughing to life, the sight of people emerging from basements and shelters where they spent the night, the smell of garbage that hasn't been collected in months because the sanitation workers are either dead or fled or simply gave up. The buildings you pass are skeletal, hollowed out by explosives, their windows empty, eyes staring at nothing. Some are still burning from whatever happened last night. Others have been ruined so long that vegetation is starting to reclaim them, green shoots pushing through concrete, nature's slow middle finger to human violence. You pass a checkpoint where fighters barely older than high school students wave you through with expressions of boredom that's more chilling than hostility would be. They've seen so much death that stopping your car barely registers as an event. One of them is eating a sandwich. Another is scrolling through his phone, probably looking at videos of anything other than where he is. They're wearing mismatched uniforms and carrying weapons that are probably older than they are, and you absolutely know that these kids have killed people. Maybe yesterday, maybe this morning. The disconnect between their age and their actions is something your brain refuses to process properly, keeps trying to reconcile and failing. Marcus snaps a photo through the window, quick and discreet, and you see the kid with the phone look up sharply, see his expression harden. Ahmed accelerates gently, not enough to seem like you're fleeing, just enough to put distance between you and a situation that could turn bad faster than you can exhale. No one speaks for several minutes. The tension in the car is thick enough to chew on. You're learning the rules of this place, the unwritten ones that determine who lives and who ends up as a statistic in someone else's story. Don't make eye contact for too long. Don't make it too short either. Don't look scared. Don't look too confident. Don't take photos of checkpoints. Don't drive too fast. Don't drive too slow. Don't trust anyone completely. Don't trust yourself to know when to run and when to stay still. It's all instinct and luck and reading situations that change faster than you can adapt to them. The neighborhood you're heading to announces itself before you arrive. You smell at first that distinctive odor of destruction, of burning plastic and smoldering wood, and something underneath that your mind doesn't want to identify, but your body recognizes on some primal level. Then you hear it, or rather, you hear the absence of it. No traffic sounds, no voices, no normal city noise. Just eerie, quiet, broken occasionally by the sound of something collapsing, some structure finally giving up its fight against gravity and physics and explosive force. Ahmed parks the car 2 blocks away from where you need to be. Says this is as close as he's willing to get the vehicle because you might need to leave quickly and you don't want to get blocked in. This is your first lesson in exit strategies, in always knowing where your transportation is, in treating every location as potentially hostile. Marcus is already out of the car, camera up, shooting the landscape of destruction before you've even unbuckled your seatbelt. He's in work mode now, that distant professional focus that lets him point his lens at things that would make normal people turn away. You grab your notebook and follow, and with each step you take, the reality of what you're walking into becomes more impossible to ignore. The street is covered in debris, chunks of concrete, twisted metal, shattered glass, household items rendered unrecognizable, a child's shoe, a cooking pot, what might be part of a door frame or might be part of a person. You can't tell and you don't want to look too closely. The buildings on either side are destroyed, their facades blown off so you can see into the rooms like a dollhouse designed by someone's worst nightmare. A bedroom with the bed still made. A kitchen with dishes still in the sink. Lives interrupted so abruptly that everything just stopped, frozen in the moment before the bombs fell. And then you see the first body. It's partially covered by rubble, and for a moment your brain tries to convince you it's something else. Anything else. A mannequin maybe, a bundle of clothes. But you know better. You know exactly what you're looking at, and something inside you that was still soft, still civilian, still innocent, begins to die. This is the moment when war correspondent stops being an abstract concept and becomes something that happens to you, in you, rewrites you at the cellular level. Marcus is photographing this scene with methodical precision, moving around obstacles, adjusting angles, his face blank as stone. You've got your notebook open, but your hand won't move, the pen hovering above the page like it's forgotten how to form words. What do you write? How do you describe this? What combination of letters and words could possibly communicate what you're seeing, smelling, feeling? Your journalism training, all those classes and workshops and lectures about objectivity and neutrality and maintaining professional distance, all of it evaporates like morning dew in blast furnace. There is no objectivity here. There is no neutral way to witness this. And professional distance is a luxury afforded to people who report on things from air-conditioned studios, not something available to you right now, standing in the wreckage of someone's entire world. Ahmed is talking to survivors, the ones who emerged from wherever they sheltered, their faces covered in dust that makes them look like ghosts, which in a way they are ghosts of the people they were before last night, before the sky opened up and rained down metal and fire. They're telling him what happened, their voices flat with shock, and he's translating for you, and you're trying to write it down, trying to capture their words in a way that will matter to someone reading a newspaper 7,000 miles away with their eggs and toast. An old woman grabs your arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and she's speaking rapidly in a language you don't understand, but her meaning is clear enough. She's asking why. Why did this happen? Why didn't anyone stop it? Why isn't anyone helping? And you have no answers, because the answers that exist, geopolitics, regional conflicts, international interests, historical grievances, the failure of diplomacy, the calculations of generals and politicians who'll never see this street, none of those answers would mean anything to her, even if you could articulate them. Her grandson is dead somewhere in that pile of rubble. What possible combination of words could explain or justify or contextualize that in a way that would make sense to her, in a way that would make sense to anyone with a functioning heart? You spend 2 hours in that neighborhood which feels simultaneously like 2 minutes and 2 years. You interview survivors, you document destruction, you watch Marcus work with that grim efficiency that comes from having done this too many times. A rescue team arrives, local volunteers with barely any equipment, and they start pulling at rubble with their bare hands, looking for survivors who probably don't exist anymore. You watch them work and you feel useless, completely useless. You're not helping. You're not saving anyone. You're just recording, witnessing, turning tragedy into content, transforming human suffering into a product that will be packaged and distributed and consumed and forgotten. The moral weight of this starts pressing down on you, joins the physical weight of your flak jacket until you feel like you're being crushed. Is this ethical? Is this right? Does your story justify your presence here, taking up space and resources in a place where both are desperately scarce? Or are you just a vulture with a press pass, feeding on misery, building your career on the corpses of strangers? These questions don't have easy answers, and the correspondents who've been doing this for years still struggle with them, still wake up at 3 in the morning wondering if they're helping or hurting, if bearing witness is enough, if anyone even cares. Back in the car, heading to the hospital now, you realize your hands won't stop shaking. You're not cold. You're not scared exactly. Your body is just processing what it's been through, what it's seen, and it's responding in ways you can't control. Marcus notices, doesn't comment. Ahmed hands you another bottle of warm water and tells you the hospital is going to be worse, says this matter-of-factly like he's warning you about traffic, worse than what you just saw, worse than bodies in rubble and grieving families and buildings blown to pieces. You can't imagine worse, but you're about to learn that your imagination has been woefully inadequate this entire time. The hospital is a concrete building that's been hit so many times it's a miracle it's still standing. The walls are pockmarked with bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Several windows are blown out, covered with plastic sheeting that flaps in the hot breeze. The entrance is crowded with people, the wounded, the sick, family members, people who have nowhere else to go. They're sitting on the ground, leaning against walls, some of them bleeding, some of them just staring into space with eyes that have seen too much. There's no triage system that you can see, no organization, just chaos and desperation and overworked medical staff trying to perform miracles with bandages and prayer. You follow Ahmed inside, Marcus trailing behind with his camera, and the smell hits you like a physical blow. It's the smell of infection and blood and disinfectant that's fighting a losing battle against bacteria and gangrene and death. The floors are sticky, the walls are stained, there are people on gurneys in the hallways because there's no room anywhere else. And you can hear screaming from somewhere deeper in the building. Someone in pain that medication can't touch because the hospital ran out of most painkillers weeks ago. A doctor approaches, young, exhausted, her scrubs stained with substances you don't want to identify. Ahmed explains why you're here, and you see her expression cycle through about 6 different emotions: anger, frustration, resignation, hope, despair, and finally something like grim acceptance. She'll show you round, she says. She'll let you see what's happening here. Maybe if people know, if they understand, something will change. She doesn't believe this. You can tell. She's said this to other journalists before you, and nothing changed. But she's going to keep trying, because what else can she do? Give up? Let this happen in darkness where no one knows? At least if there are witnesses, at least if someone is writing it down, taking pictures, filing reports, then maybe it matters somehow. Maybe she takes you to the emergency room first, which is packed beyond capacity. There are patients on the floor because they've run out of beds. There are children with injuries that will never fully heal, that will mark them for life, assuming they survive the next few days. There's a man missing both legs from a landmine, conscious and aware and staring at where his legs used to be with an expression of blank incomprehension. There's a woman holding a baby who isn't moving, isn't breathing, but she won't let anyone take the child from her, won't accept what's obvious to everyone else. The medical staff move between patients with practiced efficiency born of necessity, making impossible decisions about who gets treated first, who has a chance, who's too far gone. You're not supposed to do this, you know. You're not supposed to rank human lives, assign value, decide who lives and who dies based on the availability of resources and the likelihood of survival. But war doesn't care what you're supposed to do. War creates situations where someone has to make those decisions, and the weight of making them shows on every face in this room. Marcus is taking photos, but he's being respectful about it, asking permission when he can, keeping his distance when the answer is no. He's learned how to be invisible, how to document without intruding, how to capture truth without exploitation. You're watching him work and learning, understanding that there's an art to this that goes beyond technical skill, a moral dimension that separates good war photographers from glorified ambulance chasers. The doctor leads you to another room, this one with older patients, people who were injured days or weeks ago and are dealing with complications. Infections are rampant because antibiotics are scarce. Wounds that should have healed are festering. People are dying from things that would be easily treatable anywhere else, but this isn't anywhere else. This is a place where the normal rules of medicine don't apply, where doctors are forced to improvise with inadequate supplies, where the sick and wounded keep arriving faster than they can be treated, where death is so common it barely registers as notable. You interview a teenager who lost his arm in an airstrike 3 days ago. He's remarkably composed, answers your questions in a steady voice, tells you he was just walking to school when it happened, just walking, doing something completely normal in a place where normal has ceased to exist. He wants to be a doctor when he grows up, he tells you. Wanted to be. Now, he's not sure what he can do with one arm, but he's thinking maybe a nurse, maybe something. His optimism in the face of life-altering trauma is simultaneously inspiring and heartbreaking, and you're writing down his words, but part of your brain is screaming about the injustice of it all, about the fact that this kid's dreams got blown apart along with his arm, about the casual cruelty of a war that targets civilians and then expects the world to just shrug and move on. Your notebook is filling up with stories like this, each one worse than the last. Each one another layer of horror you'll never be able to forget. There's the mother whose daughter was paralyzed by shrapnel to the spine, the father whose son went blind from an explosion, the elderly couple who lost their entire family in one night. Story after story after story, each one a universe of pain condensed into a few paragraphs that you'll file later, that your editor will probably cut down even further because readers have short attention spans and there's only so much space in the paper. You're supposed to be objective, remember? You're supposed to just report facts, present both sides, maintain journalistic neutrality, but what's the other side of a dead child? What's the balanced perspective on a hospital overwhelmed with casualties? What's the neutral way to describe a teenager losing his arm on his way to school? The framework of objective journalism starts feeling like a cage, a set of rules designed to make comfortable people feel better about reading uncomfortable truths without actually being challenged to do anything about them. 3 hours in the hospital and you're done, not because you've gotten all the information you need, but because you literally cannot process any more horror. Your brain is full, your heart is broken, your capacity for witnessing suffering has been exceeded. The doctor thanks you for coming, asks when your story will run, and you give her a date that seems impossibly far away, impossibly irrelevant. By the time your article is published, dozens more people will have died, dozens more will be in this hospital, and nothing will have changed. She knows this. You know this. The pretense that journalism matters, that bearing witness creates change, feels increasingly hollow, but you thank her anyway. Promise to tell these stories as best you can, and you walk out of the hospital into blinding sunlight that seems obscene somehow. Seems wrong that the sun is still shining and the sky is still blue and the world is continuing to exist as if the horrors inside that building aren't happening. Ahmed is waiting by the car, smoking a cigarette, and he offers you one even though you don't smoke. You take it anyway. You need something to do with your hands, some small ritual to mark the transition between being inside that place and being out here. Your first drag makes you cough, but you keep smoking anyway, letting the nicotine and the terrible taste ground you in physical sensation, something other than the emotional overload threatening to shut you down completely. Marcus hasn't said a word since you left the hospital. He's sitting in the car, camera on his lap, staring at nothing. You've learned that this is what he does. This is his process. He needs silence to metabolize what he's photographed, needs time to compartmentalize so he can function. You climb into the back seat and close your eyes, and immediately you see everything you just witnessed, except now it's worse because your brain is replaying it, editing it, forcing you to relive it in high definition with director's commentary about all the details you didn't fully process in the moment. Ahmed starts driving, and you don't ask where you're going. You don't care. Wherever it is will be another circle of this particular hell, another location where suffering happens, and you document it and nothing changes. The radio is still broken, but you can hear gunfire in the distance, that distinctive pop, pop, pop of small arms fire, and you've been here long enough now to estimate how far away it is, whether it's coming closer, whether you need to worry about it yet. This is not a skill you wanted to develop. This is not knowledge you wanted to have. But war teaches you things whether you want to learn them or not, changes you in ways that can't be undone. The person you were before you arrived here, that optimistic, idealistic version of yourself who thought journalism could change the world, is gone. Maybe not dead exactly, but definitely missing. In their place is this new person who knows too much, who's seen things that can't be unseen, who understands on a visceral level what humans are capable of doing to other humans when the normal social contracts break down. The refugee camp is on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling sea of tents and temporary shelters housing thousands of people who fled the fighting. From a distance, it looks almost organized, like someone planned this, like there's a structure to it. Up close, it's chaos. Tents are crammed together with barely any space between them. The sanitation situation is catastrophic. You can smell it before you see it. Open sewage and garbage and the accumulated waste of too many people living in too small a space with inadequate infrastructure. Children are everywhere, playing in the dirt, chasing each other between tents, their laughter jarring against the backdrop of misery. They're resilient, you think. Kids adapt. But then you look closer and see the haunted look in their eyes, see how they flinch at loud noises, See how they stay close to their mothers like they're afraid of being separated. Again, Ahmed knows someone here, knows everyone everywhere apparently, and this person, a camp administrator who looks like he hasn't slept in months, agrees to show you around. The numbers he quotes are staggering. Thousands of people. Not enough food, not enough water, not enough medicine, not enough anything. They're doing their best with international aid. But the aid is sporadic and never enough, and sometimes it doesn't arrive at all because the roads are too dangerous or the politics are too complicated or someone decided that helping these people isn't a priority anymore. You walk through the camp taking notes, and it's overwhelming in a different way than the hospital was. At least at the hospital there was active treatment happening, people trying to fix things. Here it's just maintenance, keeping people alive day to day with no plan for the future, no solution to the larger problem, no way out. These people are stuck in limbo, waiting for a war to end that shows no signs of ending, waiting for homes to be rebuilt that might never be rebuilt, waiting for lives to restart that have been permanently interrupted. You interview a woman who fled the fighting 6 months ago. She's living in a tent with her 5 children. Her husband is dead. Her home is destroyed. Everything she owned is gone. She describes her situation in a matter-of-fact tone that you've come to recognize as the voice of deep trauma, the emotional flatness that comes from having cried all possible tears and being left with only a kind of numb endurance. She wants her children to go to school, she tells you. There's a makeshift school in the camp, but it's overcrowded and the teachers are volunteers, and there aren't enough books or supplies. Her oldest son should be studying for university exams. Instead, he's sitting in a tent helping his mother take care of his younger siblings, watching his future disappear day by day. What do you say to that? What words of comfort or hope could you possibly offer that wouldn't be insulting in their inadequacy? You talk to more families, each with similar stories of loss and displacement. A man who was a teacher, now unemployed and idle, watching his sense of purpose and identity erode. An elderly woman who's sick and needs medication that isn't available, who probably won't survive another month, but who talks about going home someday like it's still possible. A young girl who draws pictures of her house, her neighborhood, her life before. And the pictures are so normal, a house with a red door, a tree, a swing set, but that normal life is gone, blown away by forces she doesn't understand and didn't cause. Marcus is photographing it all, and you know his pictures will be powerful, will win awards probably, will make people in safe countries feel something momentarily before they scroll past. But will it change anything? Will your article and his photos actually help these people, or are you just commodifying their suffering, turning their tragedy into content for mass consumption? These questions don't have easy answers, and you're beginning to understand why so many correspondents burn out, why they can't sustain this work for long. The moral weight is crushing. The futility is suffocating. The understanding that you're witnessing horrors that will continue whether you report them or not, that your presence changes nothing except possibly making you complicit in the spectacle of it all. This realization is poisonous to whatever idealism brought you here in the first place. It's late afternoon now and you're exhausted in ways that have nothing to do with physical tiredness. Your soul is tired. Your capacity for compassion is maxed out. You need to leave. You need to get back to the hotel. You need to file your story before the internet cuts out again or the generator fails or something else goes wrong in this place where everything is always going wrong. Ahmed drives you back through streets that feel different in the fading light, more menacing somehow. The golden hour that photographers love takes on a sinister quality here, shadows lengthening and hiding threats. the beautiful sunset at odds with the ugliness of the destroyed cityscape. You pass more checkpoints, more fighters with dead eyes and big guns. You see buildings on fire in the distance, hear explosions that might be artillery or might be controlled demolitions or might be something else entirely. The city is dying slowly, block by block, and you're watching it happen with the same helpless frustration you'd feel watching someone drown when you can't swim. Back at the hotel, you climb the stairs. The elevator hasn't worked since the second day you were here, and unlock your door and collapse on that terrible mattress. You need to write your story. You need to file before deadline. But you also need to just lie here for a moment, staring at the ceiling with its water. Stains and cracks, trying to process everything you've experienced today. Your first day, day one of your new career as a war correspondent, and you're already broken, already questioning everything, already understanding that this job isn't sustainable, that people who do this for years are either incredibly strong or incredibly damaged, or both. You pull out your laptop, miraculously still charged, and open a new document and stare at the blank page. How do you start? How do you transform the horror of this day into something readable, something coherent, something that will make editors happy and readers engaged? You type a laid, delete it, type another one, delete that too. The words feel inadequate, feel like they're trivializing what you witnessed by forcing it into the structure of a news article. Inverted pyramid, who, what, when, where, why. The 5 W's of journalism that seem laughable when you're trying to describe apocalyptic human suffering. Eventually you start writing. The words come slowly at first, then faster. You describe the neighborhood, the hospital, the refugee camp. You quote the people you interviewed, trying to honor their stories, trying to let their voices come through. You write about the teenager who lost his arm, the woman with 5 children in a tent, the doctor working miracles with inadequate resources. You write objectively, professionally, keeping your emotions out of it because that's what you're supposed to do. But underneath the objective language, underneath the careful neutrality, is a scream, a howl of rage and grief and frustration that can't be expressed in a newspaper article, but that colors every sentence nonetheless. You finish the piece, read it through, make edits. It's good, you think, or at least it's competent. It tells the story. It gives readers information. It might even move some of them to feel something beyond their normal, comfortable detachment. But is it enough? Can any piece of writing ever be enough to capture what you witnessed today? Can any combination of words bridge the gap between experiencing horror and reading about it? You send the file to your editor, watch the progress bar crawl across the screen, hope that the internet holds out long enough for the upload to complete. It does. Message sent, story filed, assignment complete. Except it's not complete, not really, because tomorrow you'll do it all again. Different location, same horror. Different faces, same suffering. The war doesn't stop because you filed your story. The people don't stop dying because you documented their deaths. The machine keeps grinding, and you're just a witness, just a recorder, just someone taking notes while Rome burns. You lie back down on the mattress and close your eyes, and immediately the images from today flood back. The bodies in the rubble, the screaming in the hospital, the children in the refugee camp, the faces of people who've lost everything but keep going somehow, keep surviving, keep hoping against hope that tomorrow might be better, even though nothing suggests it will be. You can't sleep. You knew you wouldn't be able to, but you tried anyway. At some point you give up and sit by the window watching the city at night. There are fewer lights than there should be, whole neighborhoods dark because the power is out or because everyone is dead or fled. Occasionally, you see tracers in the distance, red streaks across the black sky like backward shooting stars, beautiful and deadly. You think about the people back home, the editors and readers and everyone who will consume your story with their breakfast tomorrow, and you try to imagine what they'll take away from it. Will they care? Will it matter to them? Or will it just be more bad news from some faraway place they can't find on a map? Another story of suffering they'll feel briefly sad about before moving on with their comfortable lives. You're not judging them. You can't. You were one of them until very recently. You read stories about wars and disasters and thought you understood, thought you had empathy, thought you cared, but you didn't understand. Not really. You couldn't have. Understanding requires being here, smelling it, seeing it, feeling the weight of it pressed down on your chest until you can't breathe properly. And now you do understand, and you can never go back to not understanding. And you're not sure if that's a gift or a curse. Probably both. Your phone buzzes a message from your editor. Great work. Powerful stuff. Can you get more human interest for tomorrow? Maybe find a family to profile. Readers love personal stories. You want to throw your phone through the window, but instead, you type back a simple confirmation. Sure, will do. Because what else can you say? That you can't do this? That one day has already used up your lifetime quota of witnessing suffering? That every family here deserves to be profiled, but doing so feels exploitative and insufficient, and like you're playing God deciding whose story gets told and whose doesn't? Marcus knocks on your door sometime after midnight, asks if you want to talk. You let him in and you sit in the dark, drinking warm beer he brought from somewhere, don't ask where, doesn't matter, and he tells you about his first day as a war photographer 20 years ago. Different war, same horror. He threw up, he says. Couldn't help it. Saw something so terrible his body just rejected it physically, emptied his stomach right there in the street. Thought he'd failed. Thought he wasn't cut out for this work. But he came back the next day, and the day after that, and eventually he stopped throwing up but never stopped feeling sick inside. That's the secret, he says. That's what they don't tell you. It never gets easier. You just get better at functioning while broken. You get better at compartmentalizing, at shoving everything into boxes in your mind that you'll deal with later. Except later never comes because there's always another story, another war, another reason to keep going. He asks if you're coming back tomorrow and you say yes even though you're not sure. Yes, because what else would you do? Go home? Admit defeat after one day? Let these stories go untold because witnessing them is hard? The people living through this don't get to tap out because it's too difficult? The least you can do is stay. Keep recording, keep bearing witness even if it breaks you. Maybe especially if it breaks you. Maybe that breaking is the price of admission, the cost of trying to make people care about something happening far away to people who don't look like them or sound like them or matter to them. Marcus finishes his beer, pats you on the shoulder in a gesture that's more comforting than any words could be, and leaves. You're alone again with your thoughts and your memories of the day and the knowledge that in a few hours you'll wake up and do it all again. The night drags on with a special kind of slowness reserved for people who can't sleep and can't stop thinking. You hear occasional gunfire in the distance, never close enough to be an immediate threat, but close enough to remind you that the war is always there, always active, always hungry. You think about the people you interviewed today, wonder if they're sleeping better than you are, suspect they're not. How do you sleep when your child is dead? When your home is rubble? When your entire world has been destroyed and you're living in a tent with thousands of other displaced people and no plan for the future? The resilience of humans is remarkable and horrifying in equal measure. We adapt to anything, apparently. Even this. Even war zones and refugee camps and hospitals overwhelmed with casualties. We find ways to keep going, keep surviving, keep maintaining some semblance of routine and normalcy, even when normalcy is a distant memory. You're not sure if this adaptability is inspiring or depressing. Probably both, like everything else in this place. Around 3 in the morning, you give up on sleep entirely and start preparing for the next day. You check your equipment, change your clothes, finally, a fresh shirt, though it'll be saturated with sweat and smoke within hours, and organize your notes from yesterday. Reading through them is difficult. Each sentence reminds you of something you'd rather forget but can't. The old woman clutching your arm, the teenager's missing arm, the baby that wasn't breathing. These memories are yours now, permanently installed in your mental database, accessible whether you want them to be or not. This is another thing they don't tell you about war correspondence. The images don't stay in your camera or your notebook. They come home with you. They live in your head. They wake you up at night. They color how you see everything else for the rest of your life. 4:30 rolls around again. Has it really only been 24 hours since you woke up yesterday? And you're ready, or as ready as you'll ever be. The same routine, the same flak jacket and helmet, the same sense of dread mixed with purpose, mixed with resignation. Ahmed and Marcus meet you in the lobby and no one comments on how terrible you all look. The exhaustion is communal, shared. You're in this together. 3 people trying to document the undocumentable, trying to make sense of something that fundamentally doesn't make sense. Today's plan is different but also exactly the same. Different locations, same mission. You're going to the front lines, Ahmed says, as close as you can get without actually being in combat. There's a group of fighters who agreed to let you in bed with them for the day to see what they're experiencing. Your editor will love this. Frontline action, real battlefield reporting, the kind of stuff that wins awards and gets clicks. You feel sick thinking about it. Yesterday was awful and you were nowhere near actual combat. Today you're voluntarily walking toward the shooting. This seems like a spectacularly bad idea, but you're going anyway because that's the job, that's what you signed up for. That's what readers want, even if they don't fully understand what they're asking for. The drive to the front takes 2 hours through increasingly destroyed landscape. You're leaving the city now, heading into rural areas where the fighting has been concentrated recently. The roads are terrible, pocked with craters from shells and bombs. Ahmed drives slowly, carefully, watching for anything that looks like it might be an improvised explosive device. This is not paranoia, this is survival. The roadsides are littered with destroyed vehicles, some military, some civilian, metal carcasses rusting in the sun, monuments to violence and bad luck and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You arrive at what used to be a small village and is now a fortified position. Fighters are everywhere, moving supplies, manning positions, looking generally exhausted and wired at the same time. They're older than the checkpoint kids you saw yesterday, more professional, better equipped. These are veterans, people who've been doing this for months or years, who've survived through skill and luck and the willingness to do whatever it takes to keep surviving. A commander meets you, skeptical about your presence but willing to tolerate it because someone up the chain said to tolerate it. He lays out the ground rules. You stay where he tells you to stay. You don't touch anything, you don't take photos of anything, sensitive positions, weapon systems, faces of people who don't want to be photographed. You move when they say move. You get down when they say get down. If something happens, you're on your own because his people have jobs to do that don't include babysitting journalists. You agree to everything. You don't have a choice. This is his world, his rules, and you're just visiting. He leads you to a forward position, a trench system overlooking an open area that used to be farmland. Enemy positions are visible in the distance. You can see them through binoculars, tiny figures moving around fortifications about half a mile away. This is surreal. You're looking at people who, from this distance, seem almost like toys, like a video game, except they're real and they're trying to kill the people around you, and vice versa. The disconnect between the distance and the lethality is something your brain struggles to process. The fighters around you are matter of fact about the whole situation. This is their normal. They eat, smoke, make jokes, talk about ordinary things while sitting in a trench with weapons in their laps waiting for someone to try to kill them. The psychological compartmentalization required to function in this environment is extraordinary. They've taken the horror of their situation and filed it away somewhere, covered it with a veneer of routine and dark humor and professional competence. You interview several of them over the course of the morning. A young man who joined up because his brother was killed in the early days of the war. An older fighter who has a wife and kids somewhere safe. He hopes they're safe. Hasn't heard from them in weeks, and who fights because someone has to, and it might as well be him. A woman who's a better shot than most of the men and who's tired of proving herself but keeps doing it anyway. Each has their own story, their own reasons for being here, their own way of coping with the impossible circumstances they're living in. What strikes you most is how normal they seem. These aren't Hollywood soldiers with chiseled jaws and inspiring speeches. They're regular people thrust into extraordinary situations, doing their best not to get killed while trying to accomplish objectives that often seem arbitrary or impossible. They're scared and brave and exhausted and determined, and sometimes all of those things at once. They laugh at jokes that aren't funny. They show you pictures of their families. They share their food even though they don't have enough. They're human in ways that make what's happening here even more tragic, because you understand that on the other side, in those distant positions, are other normal people with their own stories and families and reasons for fighting. War turns humans into enemies, forces them to try to kill each other, and the real evil isn't the individual fighters, but the systems and decisions and failures that put them here in the first place. Around midday, things get loud. Artillery starts up outgoing rounds from positions behind you, incoming rounds from the enemy. The sound is incredible, physically painful, your whole body vibrating with each explosion. The fighters move quickly, efficiently, taking positions, watching for threats. You're crouched in the trench trying to make yourself small, trying not to be in the way, trying not to think about how thin your protection is, how a direct hit would turn this trench into your grave. Marcus is somehow still taking photos, his professional detachment overriding whatever fear he must be feeling. You're scribbling notes, but your handwriting is almost illegible because your hands are shaking again, worse than before. This is different from yesterday's horror. Yesterday was aftermath, consequence, the results of violence. This is violence itself, active and ongoing, and you understand on a visceral level that you could die right now. Not theoretically, not as an abstract possibility. Actually die right here, right now, this second. A shell lands close enough that dirt rains down into the trench. The concussion wave hits your chest like a punch. Your ears are ringing. Someone is yelling, but you can't hear them properly, can only see their mouth moving, see the urgent gestures. Everyone is moving, and you move too, following blindly, hoping that wherever you're going is safer than where you were. You end up in a bunker, a reinforced position, dug into the ground and covered with logs and sandbags and prayers. It's cramped and dark and smells like unwashed humans and fear sweat, but it's safer, or safer adjacent at least. The shelling continues outside, a random percussion section in Hell's orchestra. No rhythm to it, no pattern you can predict. Just occasional explosions that make the ground shake and dirt filter down from the ceiling and your intestines clench, because each one could be the one that gets lucky, finds this position, collapses everything on top of you. The fighters are calm. This is routine for them. They've weathered bombardments before. Will weather this one. Will probably weather more in the future if they survive. One of them offers you water and you drink it gratefully. Realize you've been breathing through your mouth, panting like you just ran a marathon when really you've just been sitting here being terrified. The bombardment lasts 30 minutes that feel like 30 hours. When it finally stops, the silence is almost as shocking as the noise was. Your ears are still ringing. Will be ringing for hours, maybe days. The fighters emerge from the bunker cautiously, checking for damage, looking for casualties. You're shaking so badly you can barely stand. Marcus helps you up, and you see in his eyes that he's scared too, that his professional detachment has limits, that even after years of this he's not immune to the reality of almost dying. Ahmed appears from somewhere you didn't even realize he wasn't with you and asks if you're okay. You nod because you can't trust your voice right now. Physically, you're fine. Emotionally, psychologically, you're decidedly not fine, but that's not what he's asking about. The commander comes by, checks on his people first, then notices you still here. He looks surprised, like he expected you to bail during the bombardment, maybe even hoped you would. Civilians are a liability in combat zones, even civilians with press credentials. He asks if you want to stay or go, and his tone makes it clear which option he'd prefer. You've got enough material anyway. You've experienced the front lines. You've been under fire. You've fulfilled the assignment. You can leave now with your head held high, your story in the bag, your professional credentials intact. You tell him you'll go. Relief crosses his face briefly before settling back into professional neutrality. Ahmed navigates you back through the trenches, past fighters returning to their positions now that the bombardment is over. Back to routine. Back to waiting for the next crisis. You reach the car and the three of you sit inside for several minutes without speaking, without starting the engine, just existing in this transitional space between the front lines and wherever you're going next. Finally, Ahmed starts driving. The road back feels longer than the road there, every bump and crater seeming to have multiplied. Your body is coming down from adrenaline overload, leaving you feeling hollowed out and shaky. You think about the fighters you left behind, still sitting in those trenches, still watching those distant enemy positions, still living in a perpetual state of potential death. They don't get to leave. They don't get to file their story and go back to a hotel, however terrible that hotel is. This is their life, day after day, until the war ends, or they die, or they break so completely they can't function anymore. The unfairness of this, the arbitrary nature of who has to fight and who gets to observe and then leave, sits heavy in your chest. You're back in the city now, driving through familiar, unfamiliar streets. Familiar because you've been here for days now. Unfamiliar because you'll never get used to this. Never see destruction as normal, even though your eyes are adjusting to it. There's a market operating in one neighborhood, people buying and selling produce and goods. Like this is a normal city having a normal day. Life persists. Commerce continues. People need to eat and drink and buy things regardless of whether there's a war happening. The resilience is admirable and heartbreaking. These people have lived through months or years of this, and they're still trying to maintain something approaching normal life. still going through the motions even though everything around them is falling apart. Ahmed drops you at the hotel. Marcus heads straight to his room without a word. You climb the stairs slowly, each step an effort now that the adrenaline is completely gone. In your room, you sit on the edge of the bed and try to process what you've experienced. 2 days, 48 hours, and you feel like you've aged 48 years. Your phone has messages from your editor, from family back home checking on you, from friends who saw your first article and want to know more. You can't respond to any of them right now. You can't find the words to bridge the gap between here and there, between what you're experiencing and what they can possibly understand from safety. Instead, you open your laptop and start writing. Today's story pours out faster than yesterday's, maybe because the experience was more visceral, more immediate, more aligned with what people think war correspondence is. You describe the trenches, the bombardment, the fighters you met. You try to capture the reality of it without sensationalizing, without turning combat into entertainment. This is the tightrope every war correspondent walks, making the story compelling enough that people will read it while maintaining enough respect for the reality that you're not trivializing the suffering involved. You write about the disconnect between the distance and the danger, how people half a mile away are trying to kill each other, how modern warfare makes death impersonal and random and impossible to predict. You quote the fighters you interviewed, let them speak in their own words about why they're here and what they're fighting for. Some of them had clear reasons. Some of them seemed to be here because they didn't know what else to do, because the war had consumed all other options, because this had become their life by default rather than by choice. You finish writing and realize it's dark again. Another day gone. Another collection of horrors documented. Another story filed. And tomorrow you'll do it all again unless you decide not to, unless you finally admit that you're not built for this, that one more day might actually break something in you that can't be fixed. You think about quitting, actually seriously consider it for the first time. No one would blame you. 2 days is nothing, but it's also long enough to understand what this job actually is, long enough to know whether you can sustain it. Most people can't. Most people who try war correspondence flame out quickly, either because they're too scared or too traumatized or too sickened by what they witness. The ones who stay, who build careers doing this, are either remarkably resilient or remarkably damaged, or some combination of both. You're not sure which category you'd fall into if you stayed. You're not sure you want to find out. But even as you think about quitting, you know you won't. Not yet. Not after 2 days. You'll give it more time, push yourself further, see how much you can take before you break. This is partly ego not wanting to admit defeat, not wanting to be one of the people who couldn't hack it, but it's also something else, something harder to articulate, a sense that these stories need to be told, that someone has to witness and document what's happening here, that if everyone who found it difficult quit, then no one would be left to report on wars, and the world would be even more ignorant of these horrors than it already is. So you'll stay. For now, for as long as you can stand it. You'll keep writing, keep documenting, keep bearing witness, even though it's destroying something in you that you can't quite name. You'll keep doing this until you can't anymore, and maybe that breaking point is tomorrow or next week or next month, but it hasn't happened yet. Not quite yet. You lie down on the terrible mattress and close your eyes, and this time exhaustion wins over trauma. You sleep, finally. Not well, not peacefully, but you sleep. And you dream of explosions and bodies and people who looked at you with desperate eyes asking questions you couldn't answer. You dream of trenches and hospitals and refugee camps and all the faces you've seen in the past. 2 days. You dream and twitch and make small sounds of distress, and this is your new normal. This is what sleep looks like for war correspondents. Fitful, troubled, haunted. Day 3 begins the same way the others did. Early morning. Same routine. Same equipment. Same sense of dread. But something is different now. You're adapting your body and mind, making accommodations for this new reality. You're not as shocked by the destruction you see on the drive. You're not as overwhelmed by the suffering when you arrive at today's location, a neighborhood that was hit by bombs overnight. Another collection of rubble and casualties and people who were going about their lives when death fell from the sky without warning. You're documenting it all with a kind of mechanical efficiency now. Interview survivors. Record details. Take notes. Try to capture the human element without exploiting it. Repeat. It's becoming routine, which is terrifying in its own way. How quickly humans adapt, even to horror. How fast the unthinkable becomes mundane. You talk to a man whose wife died in the bombing. He shows you her photograph on his phone, a smiling woman in happier times, and you write down his description of her, his memories, his grief. But part of your brain is already thinking about how to structure this into your story, which quotes to use, how to make this man's tragedy resonate with readers thousands of miles away. This is the job. This is what you signed up for. But it feels ghoulish somehow, extracting narrative from genuine suffering, turning real people's worst moments into content. A crew from a television network shows up while you're working. You recognize them from the hotel, American journalists with much bigger budgets, better equipment, an entire support team. They swoop in with cameras and lights, film for 30 minutes, and leave. They'll be on air tonight, their report carefully edited and packaged for maximum impact in a 3-minute segment. You'll write thousands of words that fewer people will read than will watch that television segment, and you feel a mixture of resentment and relief. Resentment because journalism often feels superficial, sensation-focused, more concerned with dramatic footage than deep understanding. Relief because at least someone is covering this, at least the story is getting out there in some form. The afternoon brings you to another hospital, different from yesterday's, but suffering the same overwhelming casualties, the same shortage of supplies, the same exhausted medical staff performing miracles with inadequate resources. You're building a mental catalog of suffering now, different categories and types of horror that you're learning to distinguish. Blast injuries look different from gunshot wounds. Shrapnel causes specific kinds of damage. Chemical burns present in certain ways. This is knowledge you never wanted, expertise you wish you didn't have. A young doctor, maybe your age, talks to you about the psychological toll on medical staff. They're witnessing trauma daily, losing patients they should be able to save, making impossible choices about who gets treatment. Many are showing signs of burnout, of compassion fatigue, of post-traumatic stress, but they keep working because what else can they do? If they quit, people die. It's that simple and that complicated. You write down his words and see yourself in them. See the same impossible calculus playing out in your own head. If you quit, these stories don't get told. If you stay, you keep breaking down piece by piece. There's no good answer, no choice that doesn't cost you something essential. The only question is which cost you're willing to pay. By evening, you're back at the hotel, filing your story, going through the motions. The words come easier now, which should be good but feels wrong. You're getting better at this, more efficient, more skilled at transforming horror into prose. This is professional development in the worst possible way. You're leveling up in a skill set you wish you didn't need. Marcus knocks on your door again, and this time you go to his room instead. Several other correspondents are there, print journalists, photographers, a radio reporter. They're sharing stories, comparing notes, drinking whatever alcohol they could find. This is a ritual, you realize. The correspondents gathering to decompress, to share their experiences with people who understand, to remind themselves they're not alone in this. Everyone has been where you are. Everyone remembers their first days, their first encounters with war zone reality, their first moments of questioning whether they could continue. A British journalist tells you about her first assignment in Afghanistan, how she cried in her hotel room every night for a week. A French photographer describes throwing up the first time he photographed a body. An American reporter talks about the panic attack he had during his first artillery bombardment, how he thought he was dying, how even now, years later, he can feel his heart race when he hears certain sounds. They're not trying to one-up each other's trauma. They're sharing war stories in the literal sense, creating community through shared experience, acknowledging the cost of this work and the fact that everyone pays it differently. Someone asks you how you're holding up and you're honest. You're not. You're barely functioning. You're questioning everything. You're not sure how much longer you can do this. And instead of platitudes or tough love encouragement, they nod. They understand. They've all been there, are still there in many ways. There's no magic solution, no way to make this easier. You either learn to live with it or you don't. You find coping mechanisms or you don't. You develop the psychological armor necessary to function in this environment or you don't. And if you don't, that's okay too. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone should try. The conversation shifts to logistics, shared information about safe routes, dangerous areas, which checkpoints are manageable and which ones to avoid. This is the underground network of war correspondents sharing intelligence that could save lives, warning each other about threats, maintaining a community in a place where community is scarce. Despite the competition, everyone wants the best story, the most dramatic footage, the exclusive interview. There's also collaboration, a sense that you're all in this together, all trying to survive and do meaningful work in impossible circumstances. You leave Marcus's room feeling slightly better, slightly less alone. The knowledge that your struggle is normal, that everyone goes through this, doesn't make it easier exactly, but it makes it more bearable. You're not failing. You're just experiencing the standard reaction to abnormal circumstances. Day 4 brings a new kind of horror, a mass grave discovered on the outskirts of the city. Evidence of atrocities, of civilians executed and buried hastily, their crimes unknown or perhaps non-existent, their deaths a footnote in a larger story of systematic violence. You stand at the edge of the excavation site watching forensic teams work, watching them carefully uncover bodies, document positions, collect evidence that might someday be used in war crimes trials that might never happen. The smell is overwhelming even with a mask on. The sight of partially decomposed bodies, recognizable as human but barely, is something your brain rebels against processing. This is beyond the injuries and casualties you've been documenting. This is deliberate murder. People killed, not in combat, but in cold blood. Their bodies disposed of like garbage. Marcus takes photos, but you notice he's struggling more than usual. There's a difference between documenting the consequences of war and documenting evidence of war crimes, evidence of humanity at its absolute worst. You interview the forensic team leader, a woman who's done this work in multiple conflicts, who's seen atrocities across continents, who speaks about it with clinical detachment that you recognize as a defense mechanism. She describes the process of excavation, of documentation, of trying to identify victims and establish causes of death. She talks about the importance of evidence, of holding perpetrators accountable, of giving victims' families closure and answers. But underneath her professional language, you hear exhaustion. You hear the weight of witnessing too much evil, of spending your days literally digging up evidence of humanity's capacity for cruelty. One of the bodies is a child. You see it being uncovered, see the small size that's unmistakable even in decay, and you have to walk away. You just walk away, leaving Ahmed and Marcus at the site, and you find a spot around the corner where you lean against a wall and try not to vomit. This is your breaking point, or you think it is. This is too much. Children's bodies in mass graves, evidence of systematic murder, the calculation and deliberateness of it. Battle casualties are one thing horrible, but somehow comprehensible within the logic of war. This is different. This is evil, plain and simple, and you're standing at its literal excavation site taking notes, like you're covering a city council meeting. You force yourself to go back. You have to. This story needs to be told more than any other story you've covered. This evidence needs to be documented. The world needs to know what happened here, even though the world probably won't care enough to do anything about it. That's the cynical truth. You're learning you can document atrocities, publish evidence, write the most powerful stories of your career, and nothing substantial will change. People will read, maybe feel outraged for a moment, and then move on. The perpetrators will likely never face justice. The victims will remain dead, their families will remain traumatized, and the world will continue spinning indifferently. But you document it anyway, because not documenting it would be worse. Because bearing witness is the minimum requirement of human decency, even if witness bearing leads nowhere. Because maybe, possibly, your work will matter somehow, will contribute to some future accounting, will mean that these deaths aren't completely ignored and forgotten. That night, writing your story about the mass grave, you cry for the first time since you arrived. Not dramatic sobbing, just tears running down your face as you type, blurring your vision, requiring you to stop and wipe your eyes before continuing. You're not crying about anything specific. You're crying about everything, about the accumulated weight of 4 days witnessing human suffering at industrial scale, about the child in the mass grave, about the teenager who lost his arm, about every person you've interviewed and every story you've documented, and the sheer overwhelming magnitude of pain that exists in this place. You finish the article. You file it. You sit in the dark waiting for dawn because sleep isn't happening tonight. Some nights, you're learning, are like that. Some images burn so brightly in your memory that your brain refuses to shut down, keeps playing them on repeat, keeps forcing you to confront what you saw. Day 5 brings a different kind of assignment, a political angle. You're supposed to interview local officials, get their perspective on the conflict, the humanitarian situation, the prospects for peace. It feels absurd after yesterday's mass grave. How do you ask politicians carefully worded questions about policy when you've just seen evidence of systematic murder? But this is part of the job too. The complete picture requires multiple perspectives, multiple voices. You interview a city administrator who talks about reconstruction plans that seem impossibly optimistic, given that the city is still being actively destroyed. You talk to an aid coordinator who describes the logistics of trying to help people in a war zone where supply lines are unreliable and safety is never guaranteed. You interview a local politician who speaks in careful language about both sides and responsibility and hope for the future, and you hear the calculation in every word, the awareness that anything he says could be used against him by one faction or another. These interviews are frustrating in a different way than the previous day's work. There's a disconnect between the careful political language and the reality on the ground. These officials speak in abstractions, casualties, displaced persons, humanitarian corridors, while you've been seeing the concrete reality behind those abstractions, real people with names and faces and stories, real bodies in real graves, real children losing real limbs. The gap between political discourse and lived reality is so vast that you struggle to reconcile the two in your reporting. The rest of Day 5 is spent at the Bureau office, a fortified building where international journalists and aid workers base their operations. There's internet here that works most of the time, actual coffee, other reporters who you can talk to without explaining the basics of what you're experiencing. It's a bubble of relative normalcy in the middle of chaos. You file additional stories, respond to editor queries, check the news from home and find it surreal how ordinary everything seems there, how the concerns and controversies that dominate headlines bear no relationship to what's happening here. There's a disconnect that feels almost insulting. The world continues its regular programming while this place burns. People back home are worried about celebrity gossip and sports scores and political scandals, while here people are digging children out of mass graves. You're developing resentment toward normal life, toward people who get to live in safety and complain about problems that seem trivial from where you're sitting. This resentment isn't fair. People's problems are real to them. Suffering isn't a competition. Everyone's entitled to their own concerns. But fairness isn't something you can access right now. Right now, you're angry at the world's indifference, angry that you can document horror after horror, and most people won't read past the headline if they click on the story at all. Day 6 brings you back to the front lines. A different sector this time, different fighters but the same grinding combat, the same waiting and watching and occasional bursts of violence. You're more prepared this time, less shocked when artillery starts up, better at finding cover quickly, more attuned to the rhythms of combat. This is adaptation happening in real time. You're learning the skills necessary to survive in this environment, becoming fluent in a language you never wanted to speak. A fighter is killed while you're there. Not dramatically, not in some heroic last stand, just suddenly and randomly. One moment he's sitting in the trench smoking a cigarette and talking about his daughter. The next moment, a sniper's round catches him in the head and he's dead. That fast, that arbitrary. The other fighters react with practiced efficiency, pulling his body into cover, checking for a pulse they know they won't find, radiating his death to command. They're sad but not surprised. This is the reality of their existence. People die. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's someone else, but death is always present, always possible. They take his personal effects to send to his family. They cover his body. They return to their positions because the war doesn't pause for individual deaths. You're shaking again, worse than before, because you were talking to this man 20 minutes ago. He was showing you photos of his daughter, telling you about how she wanted to be a doctor, how proud he was of her. And now he's dead, his brain matter splattered across the sandbags, his daughter about to learn that her father isn't coming home. You interview the other fighters about him, get their remembrances, their stories. They speak in the present tense. Initially, he is a good fighter. He is always joking, then catch themselves and shift to past tense. He was. He was all these things, and now he isn't anything. You write it all down with hands that won't steady, documenting death in real time, turning tragedy into content because that's the job. Later, back at the hotel, you wonder if his daughter will ever read your article, if she'll see her father's story in print and feel something: pride, grief, anger that strangers know intimate details of her loss. You wonder if you did his memory justice or if you exploited his death for a dramatic story. These questions don't have answers, but they keep you awake anyway. Day 7, and you're officially a week into this assignment. The person who arrived 7 days ago feels like someone else entirely, someone naive and unprepared, and fundamentally different from who you are now. You've seen so much in a week. You've documented atrocities and combat deaths and suffering at every scale, from individual tragedy to mass disaster. You've interviewed dozens of people, each with their own story of loss and survival. You've filed stories every day, sent words and images out into the world, hoping they matter, fearing they don't. And you're still here, still functioning after a fashion, still showing up each morning and doing the work even though every part of you wants to quit. This persistence surprises you. You didn't think you had this in you. Today brings a different kind of story, a moment of humanity in the midst of horror. A makeshift school operating in a basement. Teachers volunteering their time to ensure children don't lose their education along with everything else. You interview teachers who are working without pay, without supplies, sometimes without even the certainty they'll survive the day. You talk to students who walk through dangerous streets to attend classes, who do homework by candlelight, who are determined to maintain some sense of normalcy despite everything. Their resilience is remarkable and heartbreaking. These children have every excuse to give up, to succumb to trauma, to let the war consume them entirely. Instead, they're conjugating verbs and solving math problems and writing essays about their hopes for the future. The teachers speak about the importance of education, about giving children routine and purpose, about maintaining hope that there will be a future worth educating for. You write this story with something approaching hope, a break from the unrelenting darkness of the previous day's reporting. This is the resilience of the human spirit your editor keeps asking for, the counterpoint to the horror evidence that humanity persists even in the worst circumstances. But even this hopeful story is tinged with sadness because you know the odds. You know that some of these children won't survive the war. You know that even those who do will carry psychological scars for the rest of their lives. You know that this basement school is a beautiful gesture, but ultimately an inadequate response to the massive trauma these kids are experiencing. Still, you write it as positively as you can because people need hope, need to believe that not everything is darkness, need some evidence that goodness survives even here. Day 8 brings you back to the hospital, where you follow a medical team through a typical shift, typical for a war zone hospital anyway, which means overwhelming casualties, insufficient resources, and constant triage decisions. You watch an emergency surgery performed with improvised equipment. You see a doctor choose between two patients who both desperately need treatment. Watch him make the impossible calculation about who has a better chance of survival. You witness the moment when a family is told their son didn't make it. Watch grief transform their faces from hope to devastation in real time. Marcus photographs it all with that professional distance that you're beginning to understand isn't really distance at all, but rather intense focus, a way of managing overwhelming emotion by channeling it into the technical aspects of composition and lighting and framing. You're learning this technique yourself, learning to observe while participating, to be present while maintaining enough psychological separation to function. It's not healthy, this splitting of yourself into the person experiencing horror and the person documenting it, but it's necessary if you want to survive this work. By the end of the shift, you've witnessed 3 deaths, 2 miraculous saves, and countless gradations in between. The medical staff are exhausted but somehow still functioning, running on adrenaline and commitment and the bone-deep knowledge that if they stop, people die. You write a profile of the doctor who made that impossible choice between patients, trying to capture the weight he carries, the moral injury of having to play God on a daily basis. Day 9. And the routine is fully established now. Wake up early, often without having really slept. Meet Ahmed and Marcus. Drive to wherever today's horror is unfolding. Document suffering. Interview survivors. Take notes. Try to capture truth without exploitation. Return to hotel. Write story. File before deadline. Lie awake, processing everything you've seen. Repeat. It's sustainable in the short term, but you're beginning to understand it's not sustainable long term. Something is going to break. Either you'll break and have to leave, or you'll adapt so thoroughly that you become one of those correspondents who can function indefinitely in war zones but can't function anywhere else, can't relate to normal life, can't connect with people who haven't experienced this specific brand of horror. Today's assignment takes you to the outskirts of the city where fighting has been particularly intense. The landscape is apocalyptic, not a single building intact, everything reduced to rubble, the ground churned up by explosions until it looks like the surface of an alien planet. Nothing lives here anymore. No people, no animals, not even plants. Just destruction so complete that it's hard to believe this was once a functioning neighborhood where people lived ordinary lives. You meet a woman who's returned to search for belongings in what used to be her home. She's digging through rubble with her bare hands, looking for anything salvageable, photos, documents, jewelry, anything that connects her to the life she had before. You watch her work and it's impossible not to help, so you put down your notebook and start moving chunks of concrete, revealing layers of someone's life compressed into debris. She finds a photo album miraculously intact in a waterproof case. She clutches it to her chest and weeps. And you understand that this album, these images of birthdays and weddings and ordinary moments, is now more valuable to her than anything else she owned. This is what war does. It reduces everything to basics, strips away all the modern complexity of life until what matters is immediate survival, shelter, food, water, and whatever small connections to the past can be salvaged from the ruins. You help her for 2 hours, not as a journalist, but as a human being who can't just stand there taking notes while someone digs through the wreckage of their life. Marcus photographs some of it, but mostly he helps too. The three of you working in silent collaboration to recover whatever can be recovered. Ahmed finds a metal box that contains official documents, birth certificates, property deeds, marriage license, and the woman almost collapses with relief. These papers are her proof of existence, her claim to whatever compensation or assistance might eventually be available, her legal identity in a world that's trying to erase her. When you finally leave, she thanks you with such genuine warmth that you feel ashamed. You didn't really help. You moved some rubble. You're going to write a story about her and then leave. Return to your hotel and your laptop and your life, while she returns to a refugee camp with a photo album and a metal box as the sum total of everything she owns. The inequality of your positions, the fundamental unfairness that you get to witness her suffering and then escape while she has to live it, sits heavy in your chest. That evening, writing about her experience, you struggle with perspective. How do you honor her story without exploiting it? How do you write about her loss in a way that matters, that might generate empathy and action without reducing her to a symbol, to just another tragic figure in a war story? These ethical questions are constant companions now, shadows that follow every interview, every interaction. You're not just writing articles anymore. You're making decisions about how to represent people's worst moments, decisions that have real consequences for how readers understand and relate to this conflict. Day 10 arrives and you realize you've been here almost 2 weeks when measured in calendar time, but much longer when measured in experience. 2 weeks that feel like 2 years, 2 weeks that have fundamentally changed who you are and how you see the world. Today you're covering a story about unexploded ordnance bombs and shells that landed but didn't detonate, lying dormant in rubble in streets and fields, waiting to kill whoever has the bad luck to disturb them. You meet a demining team, specialists who spend their days locating and defusing these deadly surprises. Their work is methodical and terrifying, each potential explosive device a puzzle that could kill them if they make a mistake. You watch them work from a safe distance, as safe as anywhere can be, in a situation involving live explosives, and marvel at their calmness, their steady hands, their willingness to do work that most people would consider insane. They find an unexploded artillery shell in a playground where children were playing yesterday. This is the nightmare scenario, a device in a place where civilians, especially children, are likely to return. The team works carefully, assessing the shell, determining the safest way to neutralize it. One wrong move and it detonates, killing the team and anyone nearby. No wrong moves happened today. They successfully disarm the shell and mark the area as cleared. But they tell you there are hundreds, maybe thousands, of similar devices scattered throughout the city and surrounding areas. They can't possibly find them all. People will be dying from these unexploded weapons for years after the fighting stops, maybe decades. This is the legacy of war death that persists long after the shooting stops, danger embedded in the landscape like a curse. Children will lose limbs to mines, farmers will be killed plowing fields. The war will continue killing people long after it's officially over. You interview the team leader about his work, his motivation, the psychological toll of spending every day handling explosives that could kill him at any moment. He's matter-of-fact about the risks, says someone has to do it, says he's good at it, so why not him? But you see the strain in his eyes, the weight of knowing that his work saves lives but can never save all the lives, that every device he disarms successfully is a small victory against massive, overwhelming danger. Day 11 through day 14 blur together into a parade of similar assignments. More hospitals, more frontline positions, more refugee camps, more interviews with survivors and fighters and aid workers and officials. You're accumulating stories, filling notebooks, taking thousands of words of notes that you'll process into articles that capture fractions of the full reality. The stories you're filing are good, you can tell from editor responses, from the placement they're getting, from reader engagement metrics that someone shares with you. Your work is making an impact, reaching audiences, contributing to public understanding of this conflict, but you're not sure it's worth the cost to yourself, to your mental health, to the person you used to be before you came here. The correspondent community at the hotel has become your family, the only people who truly understand what you're experiencing. You spend evenings together comparing notes, sharing information, telling stories that would sound like fiction to anyone who hasn't been here. There's dark humor in these gatherings, jokes about near-death experiences in terrible hotels and the absurdity of war that would be completely inappropriate anywhere else, but serve as necessary release valve here. You're learning the correspondent's argot, the specific vocabulary that develops in any subculture. You know, what taking fire means versus small arms fire versus indirect fire. You can estimate calibers by sound. You know the difference between incoming and outgoing artillery. You've learned to judge the safety of different situations, to read crowds and checkpoints and military positions, to trust your instincts about when something feels dangerous, even if you can't articulate why. These are skills you never wanted but now depend on for survival. Week 3 brings an unexpected development. A ceasefire is announced. Temporary, fragile, probably doomed to fail, but it's something. The fighting stops, mostly. There are violations, of course, sporadic shooting that both sides blame on the other. But the massive artillery bombardments cease. The airstrikes stop. The city exhales slightly, tension reducing from unbearable to merely terrible. The ceasefire creates a new kind of story, what happens in the pause between violence. How do people use this temporary respite? You spend days documenting families returning to destroyed homes to salvage belongings, aid convoys moving supplies that couldn't get through during active fighting, medical teams evacuating critical patients to better equipped hospitals elsewhere, everyone working frantically, urgently, knowing that this pause is temporary, that fighting will resume sooner or later, that every moment of the ceasefire needs to be maximized. You interview negotiators working on extending the ceasefire, trying to parlay this temporary break into something more permanent. They speak cautiously, diplomatically, clearly aware how fragile the situation is. One wrong word, one violation, one miscalculation, and everything collapses back into violence. The pressure they're under is immense. Lives depend on their success. Everything they've worked for could evaporate at any moment. Despite the ceasefire, the suffering continues. Hospitals are still overwhelmed with casualties from previous fighting. Refugee camps are still overcrowded. People are still missing. Bodies are still being found in rubble. The war's consequences don't pause just because the shooting stops, but there's a different quality to the air now, a sense of possibility, however slim. People talk about the future in slightly less fatalistic terms. Children play outside more freely. The city starts resembling a city again instead of just a battlefield. You want to be hopeful about the ceasefire, but experience has taught you to be cautious. You've seen temporary truces before in your weeks here. They never last. Something always breaks them, an accusation, an incident, a calculated decision by leaders who benefit from continued conflict. Still, you document this moment of relative peace because it matters, because the gaps between violence are as much part of the story as the violence itself. Your editor wants a retrospective piece 3 weeks in a war zone, your observations, a big picture analytical article about the conflict and its implications. You struggle with this assignment more than any daily report because it requires synthesis, requires taking all the individual stories and moments and tragedies and fitting them into some kind of coherent narrative. How do you make sense of senselessness? How do you analyze chaos? What insight can you offer beyond war is hell and people suffer and nothing really changes? You write the piece anyway, trying to contextualize what you've witnessed, connecting individual stories to larger patterns, explaining to readers who've never been here what this conflict means and why they should care. It's your best work, probably, or at least your most ambitious, but you're not sure it succeeds. How can any article, however well written, truly communicate what you've experienced? Words are inadequate tools for this job. Photos help, but they're also insufficient. The gap between experiencing horror and reading about it is unbridgeable. You can inform people, give them facts and details and first-hand accounts, but you can't make them feel what you've felt, understand what you've understood, change the way their world looks the way yours has changed. The ceasefire breaks on day 23, shattered by an artillery barrage whose origins are disputed and ultimately irrelevant. The fighting resumes. The city hunkers down again. The brief moment of hope evaporates like morning dew. You're not surprised, but you're disappointed. And that disappointment feels like another small death, another piece of optimism sacrificed on the altar of realism. Days 24 through 28 are back to the standard routine. Document violence, interview survivors, file stories, process trauma, repeat. You're operating on autopilot now, going through familiar motions with practiced efficiency. You know how to do this job. You've learned its rhythms, its requirements, its costs. The question now isn't whether you can do it, but whether you want to keep doing it. Day 29 brings an injury not to you, but to Marcus. A piece of shrapnel from an explosion catches him in the leg. Not life-threatening, but serious enough to require medical evacuation. You ride with him to the hospital, watch him get treated, see pain cross his usually impassive face. He'll be fine, the doctor says. Few weeks recovery, some physical therapy. He'll be back to work if he wants. But Marcus tells you he's done. This is his sign, his excuse to finally stop. He's been looking for a reason to quit for years, and a shrapnel wound is as good a reason as any. He's tired. He's seen enough. He wants to go home and try to remember what normal life feels like, if he still can. You understand completely. Part of you envies him for having a clear reason to leave, an injury that justifies quitting, that gives him permission to stop without feeling like he's abandoning the mission. His departure leaves you without a photographer, without a partner, without one of the few people who understood what you were going through. Ahmed is still here, of course, essential and irreplaceable. But Marcus was different, a fellow outsider, someone who could leave like you could leave, who chose to stay until he couldn't anymore. His absence changes the dynamic, makes you feel more alone in this work. A new photographer arrives 2 days later, young and eager and unprepared, and you see yourself from 4 weeks ago in his eyes. The optimism, the idealism, the confidence that he can handle this. You want to warn him, want to explain what he's getting into, but you also know that warnings wouldn't matter. He has to learn through experience like everyone does. You can't transmit understanding of this work. You can only acquire it by doing it, by witnessing what needs to be witnessed, by breaking and continuing anyway. Day 32 marks more than a month in country. 32 days that feel like 32 years. You're a veteran now by Correspondent standards. You've lasted longer than many people do. You've filed dozens of stories, documented countless tragedies, borne witness to more suffering than most people see in a lifetime, and you're still here, still functioning after a fashion. You've adapted to this environment in ways both impressive and concerning. You can sleep through distant artillery now. You can eat while smelling decomposition. You can conduct interviews about terrible tragedies with professional detachment. These are skills, but they're also symptoms of something changing in you, something hardening or breaking or both. The new photographer, whose name is David, asks you for advice. How do you do this? How do you keep going? How do you process what you're seeing? You don't have good answers. You tell him what you've learned, take care of your body, because adrenaline will mask exhaustion until you collapse. Find people to talk to who understand what you're experiencing. Set boundaries with your editor about what you will and won't do. Take breaks when you can. Accept that you'll never capture the full truth, that every story is incomplete, that your work matters even when it feels futile. He nods and takes notes like you're imparting wisdom, when really you're just sharing survival strategies that barely work for you, much less guaranteed to work for anyone else. The days continue, week 5, week 6. You've stopped counting days, measuring time instead in stories filed, in horrors witnessed, in incremental deteriorations of your mental health. You're having nightmares every night now, vivid and terrible. You're jumping at unexpected sounds, even in supposedly safe areas. You're crying at things that didn't used to make you cry, feeling nothing about things that should devastate you. Your emotional regulation is completely scrambled. Your nervous system stuck in perpetual high alert. You think about leaving. Actually plan it this time. You could file one more story and tell your editor you're done. No one would blame you. You've lasted longer than expected. You've done good work. You've earned the right to tap out, to go home, to try to recover whatever pieces of your pre-war self still exist. But you don't leave. Not yet. There's always one more story, one more interview that seems important, one more situation that needs documenting. The war continues, and as long as it continues, someone needs to bear witness. That someone doesn't have to be you. You tell yourself. There are other correspondents. Someone else could do this work. But you stay anyway because leaving feels like abandoning the people whose stories you've been telling, feels like admitting that their suffering doesn't matter enough to keep documenting it. This is irrational and you know it. Your presence or absence doesn't change their circumstances, but rationality isn't something you have full access to anymore. Trauma has scrambled your decision-making, leaving you stuck in patterns that don't serve you but that you can't seem to break. Week 7 brings a breakthrough of sorts, a major story, an interview with a high-level military commander who's never talked to press before. This is the kind of exclusive that makes careers, that gets prominent placement, that matters in professional terms. You conduct the interview in a secure location, asking questions you've been formulating for weeks, trying to get past official talking points to actual insight. He's surprisingly candid, speaking about the difficulties of fighting this war, the limitations of his forces, the pressure from political leaders who want results that may not be achievable. It's good journalism, the kind of interview you came here to get. But afterward, you feel hollow. This commander's strategic concerns seem abstract compared to the human suffering you've been documenting. His calculations about troop movements and supply lines don't capture the reality of the teenager missing an arm or the woman digging through rubble for a photo album. The disconnect between high-level decision-making and ground-level reality is something you've struggled with throughout this assignment. The people making decisions about this war, politicians, generals, international diplomats, operate in a completely different universe than the people living through it. They speak different languages, have different priorities, measure success by different metrics. Your job is supposedly to bridge this gap, to make the human reality accessible to decision makers and to make strategic decisions understandable to affected populations. But you're not sure you're succeeding at either. The strategic piece you write based on the commander interview gets great placement, generates discussion, establishes you as a serious correspondent who can get important access. Your editors are thrilled, but the story feels less true to you than the small human interest pieces about individuals struggling to survive. Maybe both are necessary. Maybe complete coverage requires both the strategic overview and the individual stories. But you know which one matters more to you, which one feels like honest witness-bearing versus career building. Week 8, and the assignment is officially over. Your editor says you've done remarkable work, exceeded expectations, generated stories that have made real impact. You're being reassigned, sent home for a break before your next posting. You should be relieved. You should be celebrating. Instead, you feel numb. The prospect of leaving generates no particular emotion. You've been here so long, adapted so thoroughly, that the idea of returning to normal life seems impossible. You don't fit there anymore. You're not sure you fit anywhere. The last few days are strange. You're tying up loose ends, conducting final interviews, saying goodbye to sources and fixers and other correspondents. Ahmed thanks you for the work, says you did well, wishes you safety in whatever comes next. You want to thank him adequately for everything he's done, the times he saved your life, the knowledge he shared, the patience he showed with your ignorance and mistakes. But words feel insufficient. How do you thank someone for keeping you alive? The other correspondents throw an impromptu goodbye gathering in Marcus's old room. He's long gone now, back in London recovering. They share stories about assignments, talk about where they're going next, maintain the dark humor that keeps everyone sane. You realize these people are the only ones who will ever fully understand what you experienced here, the only ones who don't need explanation or context. Your family back home, your friends, your colleagues who work domestic stories, they'll try to understand. They'll be sympathetic, but they won't really get it. They can't, the gap is too wide. On your last morning, you wake up at 4:30 like always, put on the flak jacket one final time, go through the familiar routine. You and David, your replacement, really, though neither of you acknowledges this directly, do one final story together. A follow-up on the woman whose photo album you helped recover. She's still in the refugee camp, still waiting for the war to end, still hoping to return home someday. She remembers you, thanks you again for helping her dig through the rubble. You give her your contact information, tell her to reach out if she needs anything, knowing that she probably won't and that you probably couldn't help much even if she did. The story you write about her is your last filed from this war zone. It's a good ending piece, coming full circle, showing the continued impact of conflict on individual lives. It's professionally satisfying, but it's also incomplete because her story doesn't end, because the war continues, because your departure doesn't resolve anything for anyone except possibly you. The drive to the airport feels surreal. You're leaving the war zone, crossing back into something resembling safety, transitioning from correspondent to former correspondent. The city passes by your window one last time, the destroyed buildings, the checkpoints, the people going about their business in impossible circumstances. You try to memorize it, try to capture some final impression, but mostly you just feel tired. At the airport, such as it is, damaged and barely functioning, you go through security, check your equipment, wait for the flight that will take you out of here. Other correspondents are waiting too, some arriving, some leaving. A constant rotation of people bearing witness to war. You recognize a few faces, exchange nods, maintain the silent fellowship of shared experience. The plane takes off and you watch the city recede below you, watch it shrink into abstraction, into the kind of distant view that makes everything seem manageable and small. But you know better now. You know what's down there, what's happening in those streets and buildings and camps. You know the individual stories behind the statistics, the human faces behind the headlines. The flight takes you to a hub city, then a connection to home. Hours in airports, hours in flight, time to process and decompress, except you can't really decompress because your nervous system is still calibrated for a war zone. You're hyper-aware of your surroundings, scanning for threats, jumping at loud noises. The other passengers look at you strangely when you flinch at an overhead bin slamming. They don't understand and you can't explain. You land in your home country and everything looks impossibly clean, impossibly safe, impossibly normal. The customs officer who stamps your passport asks where you're coming from, and when you tell them, they give you a look, sympathy maybe, or curiosity, or discomfort at being reminded that wars are happening somewhere while they're processing travelers in this climate-controlled airport. You collect your luggage and walk out into arrivals, and your family is there waiting. They hug you and you hug back, but you feel disconnected, like you're watching this reunion from outside yourself. They comment that you've lost weight, that you look tired, that they were so worried. You reassure them you're fine, you're safe now, everything's okay. These are lies, but they're necessary. Lies, the kind you tell to maintain the fiction that you can slide back into normal life without disruption. The first week home is disorienting. Everything feels strange. Your apartment is clean and safe and has reliable electricity and running water and all these things that should feel normal instead feel bizarre, excessive, disconnected from reality. You can't sleep in the silence. You've gotten too used to distant gunfire, to the ambient sounds of war. You startle awake repeatedly, disoriented, expecting to be in the terrible hotel room instead of your comfortable bed. Food tastes wrong. Conversations feel trivial. People complain about minor inconveniences, traffic, weather, slow Wi-Fi, and you want to scream at them about perspective, about what real problems look like. You don't scream. You nod and sympathize and try to pretend their concerns are reasonable. They are reasonable objectively, but you can't access objective reasonableness right now. Your calibration is completely off. Your editor schedules a debriefing, wants to talk about the assignment, plan your next moves, discuss career trajectory. You sit in their office and answer questions and try to look engaged, but part of you is still in that war zone, still processing what you witnessed, still carrying the weight of stories told and untold. They want to send you out again, different conflict, different country, but same basic work. You say you need time, need to recover, need to process this assignment before taking another. They're understanding, supportive even. Take the time you need, they say. We'll talk when you're ready. But there's also pressure, subtle but present, to get back out there while you're still sharp, still have the skills and instincts you developed. War correspondence isn't a job you can do part-time or sporadically. You're either in it or you're not. Friends want to hear about your experience, but also don't really want to hear about it. They ask how it was, and you know they're expecting some kind of sanitized, digestible summary. It was intense. It was difficult. It was important work. You give them these platitudes and watch them nod and feel relieved that they don't have to engage with actual details. The few times you've tried to share genuine stories, the mass grave, the fighter who died mid-conversation, the child's body you've watched people shut down, seen discomfort cross their faces, felt the conversation shift away from dangerous topics. You're not angry at them for this. Not really. They're not equipped to process what you experienced. They don't have the context or framework. Hearing about war zone reality doesn't fit into their lives, doesn't match the comfortable narratives they need to maintain to function in their own circumstances. But their inability to truly listen leaves you isolated, alone with memories and trauma that you can't share, can't process through conversation, can't integrate into normal life. The nightmares continue, get worse even. Your sleeping brain processes what your waking brain tried to suppress, forces you to relive moments you'd rather forget. You wake up gasping, sweating, certain you're still there, still in danger. The therapy your editor arranged helps somewhat. The therapist specializes in trauma, has worked with war correspondents before. They understand that what you're experiencing is normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. They teach you coping strategies, help you develop tools for managing anxiety and hypervigilance and intrusive memories, but they also warn you that this isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to live with, carry with you, integrate into who you are now. The old version of you, the pre-war you, is gone. You can't go back to being that person. You can only move forward as this new person, shaped by what you witnessed. You start writing a longer piece, a personal essay about your experience, not for publication initially, just for yourself, a way to process and make sense of what happened. The words pour out, tens of thousands of them, memories and observations and analysis and emotion all tangled together. You write about the specific moments that haunt you, the teenager losing his arm, the woman in the rubble, the fighter who died, the child in the mass grave. You write about your own response, your evolution from shocked newcomer to numbed veteran. You write about the moral questions, the ethical dilemmas, the constant struggle between bearing witness and exploiting suffering. Reading back through what you've written, you realize it's not really about the war, or it is, but it's also about you, about what happens to people who choose this work, about the costs of bearing witness. Your experience is both unique and completely typical. Every war correspondent goes through some version of this. Everyone pays these psychological costs, carries these burdens, struggles to reconcile what they've seen with the comfortable fictions that keep normal society functioning. You think about going back, your editor is waiting for your decision. There are other wars, other stories, other horrors that need documenting. The skills you developed aren't useful anywhere else. You're trained for this specific terrible job now. You're part of this community of correspondents who rotate through war zones, who bear witness professionally, who trade their mental health for bylines and impact in the sense that they're doing something important. Part of you wants to go back, not because you enjoyed it, you didn't, couldn't have, shouldn't have, but because it felt meaningful in ways that normal life doesn't, because the work mattered even when it felt futile, because the people you met deserve to have their stories told, because someone has to do this, and you're apparently someone who can, at least for now, at least until you break completely. But another part of you knows that going back would be a form of self-harm, a choice to further damage yourself in service of a career that chews people up and spits them out. You've seen the veteran correspondents, the ones who've been doing this for decades. They're impressive and broken in equal measure, carrying trauma like scars they've learned to live with, but that never fully healed. You could become that, or you could choose differently, find some other kind of journalism, some other way to make impact that doesn't require regular exposure to humanity's worst moments. The decision paralyzes you. Both options feel impossible. Both options feel necessary. You're stuck between who you were and who you've become, between the comfortable life you left behind and the meaningful horror you experienced. Week 6 home, and you're still struggling, still not sleeping well, still startling at unexpected sounds, still unable to fully engage with normal life. Your therapist suggests maybe you're not ready to make big decisions, that you should give yourself more time to recover before committing to anything. This makes sense intellectually but frustrates you emotionally. You want to know what comes next. You want to have a plan, a direction, a way forward that makes sense of what you experienced. A package arrives, a book sent by Marcus, his photos from the war zone, recently published, a coffee table volume that's getting critical acclaim and award buzz. You flip through it and see your experience reflected back, the moments you witnessed captured in his images, the hospital ward, the refugee camp, the destroyed neighborhoods, the faces of survivors. It's beautiful and terrible, exactly what good war photography should be. He's inscribed it to you. We bore witness together. Take care of yourself. You appreciate the sentiment, but also feel the weight of those words. Bearing witness is expensive. Taking care of yourself afterward is hard, may be impossible if you've witnessed enough. You start teaching yourself, guest lecturing at journalism schools about war correspondence, sharing your experience with students who are considering this career path. You're honest about the costs, the trauma, the difficulties, but you also talk about the importance of the work, the necessity of bearing witness, the value of bringing distant conflicts into public consciousness. The students listen with wide eyes, some intrigued, some horrified, all recognizing at some level that this job isn't for everyone, might not be for anyone really, but that someone has to do it anyway. During one lecture, a student asks if you do it again, knowing what you know now, understanding the full cost. You pause, considering. The honest answer is complicated. You wouldn't trade the experience. It fundamentally changed you, gave you knowledge and perspective and understanding that you value even as you wish you didn't have them. But you also wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, wouldn't recommend it lightly, wouldn't say the benefits outweigh the costs because the costs are so steep and the benefits so abstract. You give some diplomatic answer about personal choices and individual circumstances, but later you think about the question seriously. Would you do it again? You still don't know. Some days you think, yes, the work was important, the stories mattered, bearing witness is a crucial function in an interconnected world that would prefer to ignore distant suffering. Other days, you think, no, the trauma isn't worth it, the costs are too high, there must be other ways to make impact that don't require sacrificing your mental health on the altar of journalism. 3 months home now and you're functioning better, the nightmares are less frequent, the hypervigilance is easing slowly. You're sleeping more, eating normally, engaging with friends and family with something approaching genuine connection. The acute phase of trauma is passing, leaving behind a chronic awareness, a permanent shift in how you see and experience the world. You'll never be the person you were before. That person is gone, replaced by someone who knows too much, who's seen things that can't be unseen, who carries the weight of bearing witness. Your editor calls. Another assignment, if you want it, different region, different conflict, but same essential work. They need someone with experience, someone who knows how to navigate war zones, someone who can bear witness effectively. They're not pressuring you, they say. Only if you're ready. Only if you want to go back. You tell them you need to think about it. You do think about it for days, for weeks. You make lists of pros and cons. You consult with your therapist, with Marcus, who's made his choice to stop, with other correspondents who've continued. You think about the people you left behind in that war zone, still living through conflict, still suffering, still deserving to have their stories told. You think about the new horrors unfolding in this other region, the atrocities that need documenting, the witness bearing that needs to happen. You think about yourself, your capacity to do this work again, whether you've recovered enough or whether going back now would be too soon, too damaging, too much. The decision should be clear, but it isn't. Nothing about this work is clear. It's all shades of gray, all impossible choices between competing goods and competing harms. Finally, you decide. Your decision doesn't matter for this story. This isn't about where you went next or what you chose. This is about what those first few weeks taught you, about what it means to be a war correspondent, about the costs and benefits and impossible equations that define this work. You wouldn't last a day as a war correspondent. Not because you lack courage or skill or determination, but because lasting isn't really about the first day or the first week or even the first month. It's about the accumulation of trauma, the compounding effects of bearing witness to horror after horror, the slow erosion of whatever psychological defenses you brought with you. Some people last months, some last years, some build entire careers doing this work, but everyone pays. Everyone carries the weight. Everyone sacrifices pieces of themselves that they can never fully recover. The work is important. Someone has to do it. The world needs people willing to bear witness to its worst moments, to document suffering, to make distant conflicts real and immediate for audiences who would prefer to ignore them. But the work also destroys people, changes them fundamentally, takes toll that can't be fully calculated or compensated. if you're thinking about becoming a war correspondent, understand this. It's not about whether you're brave enough or tough enough or skilled enough. It's about whether you're willing to pay the price, whether you can live with what you'll witness, whether you can carry the weight of bearing witness for the rest of your life. Most people can't. Most people shouldn't try. The ones who do this work are either incredibly strong or incredibly broken, or both, and usually you can't tell the difference from the outside. They function, they file stories, they move from war zone to war zone, they bear witness professionally, but inside they're carrying burdens that never fully lift, processing traumas that never fully heal, living with memories they can never fully escape. So no, you wouldn't last a day as a war correspondent. Not because the first day would kill you, though it might, but because surviving the first day is just the beginning, just the entry point into a career that demands everything and gives back purpose and meaning and trauma in equal measure. The question isn't whether you could survive one day. The question is whether you could survive becoming the kind of person who does this work, whether you could live with who you'd become, whether the price of bearing witness is one you're willing to pay. For some people, it is. They choose this work despite the costs, or perhaps because of them. They become war correspondents and do vital, important, necessary work documenting conflicts and atrocities and human suffering. They bear witness so the world cannot claim ignorance. They file stories that might possibly contribute to change or justice or simply to collective memory. But they pay for it. They all pay for it. And that's the truth. Hollywood forgets when it makes romantic movies about brave journalists in flak jackets. That's the reality the job listings don't mention. That's the cost that every war correspondent carries, hidden behind bylines and awards and professional accomplishments. You wouldn't last a day because no one really lasts. They just learn to carry the weight of not lasting, to function while broken, to continue despite the costs. That's what makes them remarkable. That's what makes the work possible. And that's why most people wisely choose different careers,